All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Jones Wright, and I am a law clerk for the Honorable Sam A. Lindsay. And it is my pleasure to moderate today's panel, Allies, Mentors, Sponsors, Oh My, Elevating the Success of Minority Lawyers, brought to you by DAYL's Lawyers Promoting Diversity Committee. First, I would like to thank Sherry and Hisham for their assistance putting this panel together and for allowing us the space to present and discuss this topic. In today's climate, there's a lot of discussion about diversity in the legal profession, but this conversation is not a new one. Nonetheless, timing is everything. And right now, the eyes, ears, and hearts of law firms and corporations around the country are moved to act, draft, and implement initiatives that will not only recruit diverse talent, but retain them. While fancy charts and graphs and programs may do the trick, a powerful way to achieve this is through relationships. And that is what we are here to discuss today. Number one, how can we as young, diverse lawyers seek allies, mentors, and sponsors? And how can our colleagues and those who came before us effectively assume those roles and help us achieve success in the legal profession? To discuss these topics, we have three great panelists with us today. First, we have Juanita Deloach, and she is an associate at the Dallas office of Barnes & Thornburg, where her practice focuses on safeguarding and protecting IP rights. This path should not come as a surprise because Juanita also has a PhD in electrical engineering, and prior to law school, she was a process engineer with Texas Instruments. She is also incredibly active in the community and serves on several boards, including the board for Girls Embracing Mothers, also known as GEM. She is also a member of the New Roundtable, and last year, she was named to the National Black Lawyers Top 100 list. Welcome, Juanita. Next, we have Greg Franklin, who is an associate with Greenberg Targ's Dallas office, where his practice focuses on construction and financial service litigation. Prior to becoming a lawyer, he served as a finance and risk compliance manager, senior IT auditor for Bank of America. Greg also has extensive legal association and community involvement, including his role on the Mayor's Star Council. Most recently, Greg was named to the National Black Lawyers 2020 Top 40 Under 40 list. Thanks for being here. And then last but not least, Tamara Woodard is Vice President and Associate General Counsel at AT&T, where she and her team provide legal support for the Chief Diversity Officer, Human Resources, Asset Protection, and Corporate Litigation. Prior to joining AT&T, she was in private practice where she focused on a range of matters from complex securities class actions to employment law matters. Like our other panelists, she is active in the community and serves as a mentor for the Diverse Attorney Pipeline Program, DAP, and is on the board for the New Roundtable. Most recently, Tamara was named as a finalist for DCEO's 2020 Corporate Counsel Award. Welcome, Tamara. So,
thank you.
Let's go ahead and jump right in because this is a topic where I know all of you have a lot to share, so I do not want to cut any time here. So while I gave your brief bios, I said nothing about how you actually got to where you are today. So how did you get here? Was your path linear or did it come with a few twists and turns? And I'd like to start with Juanita.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, as Ashley mentioned, my path did not come straight to the legal field. Prior to transitioning to the law, I was an engineer. I spent a lot of time in school. I did bachelor's, master's, PhD, a second master's, and I spent 8 years as an engineer at TI. So that was my dream job. I was gonna die or retire there, just like everybody else, retire on my TI stock. But in 2007, TI decided to outsource my job overseas to the foundries. So I decided I wasn't going to Taiwan. And unlike some of my colleagues, I was in a unique position where I didn't necessarily have to worry about family or kids because I didn't have either. So I could do what, I had some time to think about what I wanted to do. So an opportunity came to transition to law, and I became a legal intern at Jones Day. So I spent 5 years there working as a legal intern and pursuing the evening program, JD at SMU. And from Jones Day, I went to Denton's, and from Denton's, I wound up at Barnes. So my path, although it may seem linear, But transitioning to a second career is not always easy, because as an engineer, I had a specific way of learning things. There is no gray. And in law, there's a lot of gray. So in engineering, there is a right answer, but in law, you could have a right answer, but someone could be more persuasive and their answer becomes the right answer. So that is how I have wound up as an associate today in the legal field at Barnes and Thornburg.
Thank you, Juanita. Greg, what about you? How'd you get here?
Well, I will tell you this, my path was definitely not linear. I took a few detours, some Euro steps, and there were peaks and valleys. I mean, I had a whole career before getting into law. Before I went to law school, I worked at a large financial services institution where, and as you mentioned before, I was a finance manager with over a $500 million portfolio through doing intercompany transactions internationally. I was an audit manager for several years, risk and compliance officer for several years. So with the risk of not telling you all about how old I actually am, I did that for several years before I actually went to law school. I started law school when I was in my 30s. But that path and everything I've done leading up to that point is a part of who I am today, and I think it's contributed into the lawyer that I am. So with the twists and turns, I mean, there's opportunities, and consistent with the theme that we're going to talk about today. I mean, I didn't get there by myself. I had some allies and mentors and sponsors along the way.
Nice. Tamara, what about you?
Same as Juanita and Greg, a non-linear approach. So I had a 5-year career before, I wouldn't call it a career, but a 5-year journey between undergrad and law school. I took a non-traditional approach. Once I graduated from law school, I had a job at a really big firm, and I eschewed that for a small plaintiff securities class action firm. Quickly figured out that wasn't the right choice, but it was a good choice for a number of reasons. Went to a defense firm, figured out there that I didn't want to continue on the partnership track. There were just things about firm life that I felt didn't work well for me, and I went in-house 10 years ago in November, and even within the in-house path, it's been non-linear. I've had 8 jobs in 10 years all within the legal department, but moved around a bit, so had quite a lot of exposure to the business side of things and different parts of the company. And I've been in my current role for a year and a half now. So one of my longer roles, actually.
Interesting. I love that we all kind of took this non-traditional path. I was a teacher before and during law school. So naturally, skill sets from all different walks of life definitely help make us the lawyers we are today. So diving into this conversation about diversity and being a minority in this field, was there ever a time where you felt unseen or undervalued by your colleagues? And how did you handle that situation? Greg, let's start with you.
Well, I will tell you this. As an associate, it's, regardless of, background, whether you're a minority, I mean, there's times where you will feel undervalued. I mean, it's just kind of goes with the job. But I guess the key is if you're feeling undervalued consistently, and then that's not, where you should be. I think, as a minority, one of the key issues is when we start to feel unseen. And this typically manifests itself in 2 environments, right? One is in the social environment, and in times when you are in meetings with not only your colleagues, but with partners and having discussions. So in the social environment, first we have to acknowledge that, we as minorities, we come in with different cultural backgrounds. It may be different economic backgrounds. That's not negative commentary on any of those things, but that's just where we're at. So in the social environment with our peers, we can tend to have these conversations where you're in the conversation, but you're not really in the conversation because you have no concept or a context of what they're talking about, right? And that can make you feel alienated, so to speak. And so what I've taught myself to do is what I call LLS, is that you learn, when you listen, you learn, and you share. So you listen to what the group is talking about, and you learn what's important to your colleagues, because that's a part of the way that we're going to grow, right? And the second part is you share. You share something about yourself, so you can start developing these relationships of the people that you're going to be working with. And from a meeting standpoint, when you're meeting with your colleagues and partners and discussing different situations, you may feel alienated because typically as minorities, we tend not to bring our whole selves to the conversations because there's things in our minds that click. I mean, we don't want to say anything that's perceived as being stupid or unsmart. And if we come across as being aggressive, how people may perceive that. But once you start doing that, you start to alienate yourself from the group. And so what I like to challenge people to do when I do myself is, understanding when you bring your full self to any situation, that's when you're adding value as a diverse person. Because if they didn't want you there by any objective reason, you wouldn't be there. And so you add value. So understanding that you're worthy and that you're valuable and your input is valuable. And so forget about sounding stupid or anything of that nature. Give your all, your full, give your commentary and give your thoughts. So that also helps with you not feeling unseen.
I like that. LLS, listen, learn, and share. Tamara, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us, as Greg said, men, women, people of color, non-minorities, you probably felt undervalued. So I don't think there's any group owns that. But I do think you have to dig into it and maybe find the source of it. So, I mean, the first question is it in your head or, right? I mean, because sometimes we talk ourselves into, sometimes out of, but sometimes we talk ourselves into things that aren't really there. Sometimes they are there, but I think you have to really get clear about what is it that you're feeling and whether it's real or not. So if you're feeling undervalued, for example, is it I'm not getting a good opportunity? Is that why I'm feeling undervalued? Or is it I'm getting a good opportunity, but I'm not getting credit for the opportunity, right? So I think you have to really dig into what's underneath what you're feeling, why you're feeling, and that will guide you, because if it's not opportunity you're getting, that takes you down one path. But if it's I'm getting opportunity, but I'm not getting the credit or the recognition, that's an entirely different path. So I don't think there's one approach to it other than getting really specific about why it is I'm feeling this way, and then bringing it back to the point of this conversation, right? If you've got a mentor, an ally, a sponsor, you hopefully have all three, maybe also an advocate, a fourth, that you should be able to talk to all of those people about what you're feeling. And they all will probably have very different perspectives, very different feedback, and very different input for you about how to resolve that feeling of being unseen. And your sponsors, your advocates, right, should be able to really help with that and elevate for you so that you are being seen, recognized.
And we're certainly going to talk about each of those roles. And I love that you added an advocate. So we'll even add that in as a talking piece. But before we get there, we hear a lot about minority attorneys leaving big law. And oftentimes it's because the attorneys feel that the firms are not recognizing their value or their worth. And the firms sometimes don't understand why the associate of color might feel that way. And often it's because they can't cite any overt discrimination or overt instance of even racism that would lead to those feelings. But then we have to talk about microaggressions. So Tamara, what are some of those microaggressions that you have seen or felt that might lead to some isolation and frustration in that area?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about microaggression is you can't always put a name, you can't always touch it or feel it, but you know what's happening, right? That's what's happening. And so I think some of the things that I have seen are men asking me to always schedule meetings or showing up at the meeting and I'm supposed to take the notes. Things that I don't know if they're microaggressions, I don't know if they're unconscious bias, but they always seem to happen to the women in the room or the people of color in the room. So maybe what I'm talking about are unconscious bias, not microaggressions. Maybe they're both. Maybe they diverge. But I think you have to, sometimes I get asked to schedule calls, right? Hey, can you have your assistant do this? Well, no, you just took 20 seconds to write me an email to ask me to have my assistant do it when you could have done it. Oh, by the way, you report to me, so you really should be doing it. So things like that. But I think when you see them, I think it's one of those things. I'm a deliberate person, so you may hear this refrain or what sounds like a theme for me. But first, I think you have to make sure that's actually what's happening. And so the first time it happens, it's tough to say. It's tough to put it in a category, to categorize it. But if you're clear that that's what's happening, I think non-aggressively, you have to confront it, right? I mean, you just have to call it out for what it is. So for example, being asked to take notes, no, I don't always accept that, right? Sometimes I will say, for example, look, I did this the last 6 times. John, why don't you do it? So if it's a man always asking me, I put it back on a man, right? If it's a white person always asking me, I will put it back on them. And you can do that without interjecting any uncomfortableness into the conversation. Although sometimes I think you have to do that too, frankly. Out of the presence of everyone else, sometimes you have to have those uncomfortable conversations. But again, at first, I think you have to just be clear that that's actually what you're experiencing. And then again, I always say, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. So that is what has worked for me. Different folks may approach it differently.
I like that. Greg, what about you?
And I've been fortunate not to have experienced any microaggressions while practicing law, but plenty of it when I was in corporate America in law school. I mean, most of the time it was around the concept of how'd you get there? Like, how did something happen, right? So so it's going back to my corporate days. I had people to help me along, but by the age of 26, I was a VP within their risk and compliance organizations. And a lot of the questions that I would get from people who met me was, how did you get here? Or why? Or if I was in law school, why I got certain grades without actually thinking that, I accomplished it through my work. And so what I think is important to understand, even though that you may be a recipient of this microaggression, it's not your problem. It's the person who's exuding this microaggression. And how I typically handle it is, if it's like a one-off, I give people grace, because when we say stupid things all the time, that's just a part of our humanity. But if it becomes a trend, I think what's effective is to throw it back at them. And so if they say something that's that you consider this a microaggression, and ask them why. Have them explain why they said something. And so that puts the spotlight back on them, and they have to internally understand why they said a certain thing, and understand, whatever they said, it may have either come off wrong or just is wrong from their heart. And so it challenges them. So it's not about us as the recipients, it's about the microaggressors and challenging them to change their behavior.
I like that. And Greg, what's your advice for people who may be observing these microaggressions, but they weren't directed at them personally?
I like the status of, or saying when someone's there's upstanders and there's bystanders. The bystanders just stay around and don't say anything. You have to be an upstander in everything you do. You have to be a solution to the problem, and you have to have the courage and the moral courage to step in and challenge that person on behalf of someone else who might not step up. Because as attorneys, we are advocates, number one. Whether you're a litigator or you're a transactional attorney, we are advocates. And so you don't lose that responsibility in these types of situations. So if someone else wants to say anything, be brave enough, be bold enough to stand up and challenge that microaggressor.
Juanita, what would you add to this topic on microaggressions and how they should be handled?
I think that we got two different, ways of addressing them. And, we talked about kind of the grace, you let it go because you can't fight every battle every day. You just be wore out, right? Or you can confront it directly. And I think in those situations, you have to be cognizant that, if it's a group, then this person may become very defensive. And if it's something immediate, your emotions may be high. So there may be some words spoken, which you may later regret. Or you can step back, take a minute, and maybe approach that person privately and just say, hey, you got a minute? I'd like to talk to you about something. And that way you've had a chance to formulate your words, calm down, and you're not putting them in a position to get defensive. But I think with all of those choices, you have to just kind of evaluate the importance of the issue to you, because if it's something really trivial, then why expend the energy and the time, right? And you also have to look at the relationship that you have with that person, right? Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? And then from the personal side, is this something that really attacks me and makes me question my legitimacy as a lawyer, my intelligence, my being as a person? So your feelings come into it. And then I think as persons of color and as women, everything we do is judged more harshly. So sometimes you have to think about the big picture and how do you want to be perceived now and in the future? Because all of our actions, people don't get amnesia. They have memories like elephants. And so, what you do today, someone could take it and, 3 years later, they still remember you as that person that, went off on someone in a meeting and such. And then I think too, sometimes, unfortunately, our actions impede people coming behind us, because it's like, how they say one person can ruin it for everybody. And unfortunately, sometimes for us, everyone would get judged as, Juanita behaved. So the next person coming along, that stigma is going to be attached to them if they even get that opportunity. So, microaggressions happen every day. And I think we just have choices in how we respond. And it's each a personal decision. I wouldn't necessarily tell everyone that they had to behave a certain way, but I can just speak on, how I would respond and kind of looking big picture, because I know you can't fight every battle. And they are called microaggressions for a reason. They're not macro, right? So they're little things, right? And eventually there are some of those that, it's like, look, I had a situation where I thought this was more macro, but I was on the elevator and I was with some colleagues, and we were on the elevator with some other folks in our building. And a white man complimented me on my hair because, I'm coiffed every day. But, the compliment was, oh, your hair looks really great. Okay, thank you, right? You can stop there. But he had the audacity to continue to say, is it a wig or is it a weave? And I was just taken aback, and there was no kind of thought process, but the reaction was, you don't know me, you don't get to ask me that question. So I'm not sure what made you think you could ask me that on an elevator full of people, but you don't get to ask me that. Now, there is no relationship. There is nothing that I need to preserve. There is nothing about how he perceives me now in the future that matters to me. But it was just a situation where that was just, it took me aback. And I don't know what caused him to think he could have that conversation with me.
And I think that's interesting. Often, I think that's what happens. We are taken aback by even these microaggressions that maybe we make macro, or maybe they really are micro. But I think all of your advice is helpful, especially for those of us who may be a little more hesitant sometimes to engage in any level of confrontation. So those are incredible tips. So I do want to move now to really the focal point of this conversation, because being unseen, feeling undervalued, dealing with microaggressions, a lot of these things can be mitigated, I guess, by allies, mentors, and sponsors. And these roles are important to the success of anyone. But Tamara, why are they even more important to minority attorneys? I think we lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just trying to cut the background, so I was on mute. Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you said, they're important for anyone, but obviously, just as a numbers game, there are less of us entering, and there are less of us in the room. There are less opportunities at the top, and so as you enter into a space, whether it's a law firm or a corporate department, whether it's public service, many of us are first generation lawyers. You don't know your way. And as lawyers, I think a lot of us, I was at least terrified walking in the door of the law firm where there were, 100 associates in my summer associate class in 6 blocks. I didn't know where to go or who to turn to. And so it becomes very important that you have people, allies, right? Those who are at my level, who are entering at least in my view, who are in my peer group, in my class. Maybe sometimes they're not, but also mentors, someone who is maybe not in the firm, maybe not a lawyer, maybe just someone in my family or in my community who has traveled the road of being a successful professional. And then my sponsor, I think my AirPod died, but my sponsor, someone, right, who, when I do good work, can speak up for me in the room and make sure I'm not being undervalued and underseen. And then, of course, the advocate, which I added, which is someone who goes to bat for me along with my sponsor. So maybe they're not the sponsor, but they're in the room and they're going to advocate with my sponsor for me. Those people are important because without them, we won't be able to change the face of the legal profession as we see it. I mean, study after study says that people hire and tend to gravitate towards people who think and act like them, people who they're familiar with and who they know. And so to be able to break that cycle, we need people, sponsors, mentors, allies to speak up. We, as a mentor, I need to be able to reach back and pull someone else up and show the next Tamara, who's a first generation college student, first generation lawyer, what it is going to take. She can be her authentic self for sure, but these are the skills that you're going to need to navigate this space, because it's not a level playing field. I know we're in this post-racial Obama era, which perhaps the last 4 years have exposed as not being true. But we are not playing on an equal playing field. The folks that we are competing against have generations upon generations of family who have been judges and lawyers. And so it's institutionally, right? Their name carries weight. Their grandfather's name carries weight. Their father was the CEO. Their grandfather was the mayor. And so when you are looking at the playing field not being level, you starting on first base and they're starting on third base, you need people to help you cover and make up that ground. And one thing I would just say that I think is critical to take away from this conversation, although we're talking about diversity, is you need diverse mentors, sponsors, and allies. They can't all look like you. If they all look like you, you're probably not going to be successful.
And so, Tamara, we've actually had a question posed by an audience member which you talked about the importance of having sponsors, mentors, and allies that don't look like you. The question was, though, how do you create that common ground so that sponsors who don't look like you or allies or mentors who don't look like you can kind of forge those necessary relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to create them in several ways. Some of it is fortuitous, some of it is not. I mean, I'm a huge college football fan. I went to University of Michigan, and so I've been able to create one really good relationship based on that alone. Partner did not know whether I was good, right? Whether I was a bad attorney, whether I was a good attorney. Same thing with school, right? Sometimes your school in Texas, I know nobody cares about University of Michigan. They all care about right, SMU, UT, Baylor. So so school is another way. But doing great work is the absolute best way, I think. I know people say, I know we talked about feeling undervalued, but I think, at the end of the day, whether you're at a law firm or whether you're in-house, what our clients want is they want a good lawyer. They want a great lawyer that they're paying for. And if you do good work, I know it sounds kind of silly and hokey, especially in the context of a conversation about diversity, where maybe access to opportunities aren't all the same. But I don't want to overlook the fact that underlying all of this is you have to have a good work product. So doing good work is a good way to get. I have a sponsor, my boss, who has been one of my biggest advocates. She's a white woman, by the way, and she just took an interest in me because diversity matters to her. So sometimes it's not that you're going to go find the person. The person is going to come find you because they care about diversity or women or whatever it is that you stand for. That's going to be important to them. So I think there are probably other ways, but those are the top. I think that was 4 ways that have been helpful for me, that have worked for me.
Thank you for that. Greg and Juanita, what are your thoughts on that? How do we create common ground whenever your sponsors, allies, and mentors may not look like you or have the same background as you? Juanita, you want to start? Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Well, let me. I'll discuss that the second part that you just. Let me talk about allies and mentors and sponsors as a whole, and I invite you all and I challenge you all to think about allies in a more expansive way. Like I said, it'd be the visceral reaction to think of your allies as your colleagues, your peers, or the people who you are currently working with. But you've been developing allies since you were in undergrad. I mean, these are the people collectively who are your friends, the people that you've interacted with, or the people who will be looking out for your best interests. At some point in your career, you will need to develop business. And they're going to be the people who have been your friends in undergrad, people who are referring your work and while you're in law school, and the people that you meet through the DAYL program and other organizations that you're with. And so when you think about allies, think of it in a more expansive way. And your mentor is the person that people are more familiar with. I mean, these are the people who will help guide you, and navigate you through this legal profession. But a very critical piece, this is paramount to your success as an attorney, is going to be that sponsor. There's going to be a lot of times when you aren't at the dinner table with the partners, or at that table, but you may be on the menu when they're discussing it. And as a part of our humanity, I mean, even though we try our best on everything that we do, there's going to be some things that we fall short on. And we don't want that to define us. But that sponsor, that advocate on your behalf at that dinner table, is going to advocate for you on whatever the subject is. When we're talking about the progress you've made that year, or the things that you've accomplished, and the things that you're capable of doing. So you want to make sure that whoever your sponsor is, or make sure that you get a sponsor, whoever that sponsor is, has a genuine interest in your success. Otherwise, the firms and organizations will have this talent that just dies on the vine if there's no one else out there to make sure that you progress into those upper levels within the firm.
Okay, Juanita, what are your thoughts on this?
I would say that sponsors are strategic because these are people who should have political capital to expend on you, and they should be people in power. So not just anyone can be a sponsor. I mean, perhaps they can, but if you have no power, it's hard to be in the room where it happens because they don't have a seat at the table. So for me, I had a situation where when I started at Barnes 2 years ago, they have a program, a formal kind of mentor program called Keymaker. And so I was assigned someone, and I said, all right, here's another one of these programs. You know how they are. But I said, new attitude, new place. You're going to go in here and try to make this happen and give it 100%. So, reached out, we had a conversation, and it was kind of like, well, all right, if you need something, let me know. I was like, all right. Okay. So when I needed something, didn't get a response to my phone call, didn't get a response to my email. And so I went back to the person over it, and I was like, well, I'm not happy. And she was like, oh, no, I go talk to him. And I was like, whoa. She's like, no, I got you. I'm not going to put you out there, but I'll go talk to him. So after that, I get a call, kind of same thing. If you need something, let me know. And I just wasn't happy. And so I went back, and, I thought I could just kind of sweep this under the rug, just like all the other, these failed mentor programs at these firms, they're just kind of for show. Or I could do something different. So I said, look, I'm not happy. I want a new person. So I was assigned a new person, and I approached that relationship different. Our first call, I was very straight up front. I was like, look, this is what I want from this relationship. I want it straight, no chaser. And if I ask you something and you can't tell me, you tell me. Let me know what hat you're wearing. And otherwise, you're going to be the eyes and ears that I don't have. And you're going to tell me stuff that I need to know that maybe you can tell me, maybe you can't. But, I want to get something out of this relationship. And this was someone who had political capital, had power, but not in my practice area, can't give me work, but he's in the rooms, right? And we built that relationship, and we schedule calls. And so it's not like, oh, if you need something, let me know. This is, even if I don't need anything, I'm checking in. I'm gonna let you know what's going on. And, when I did really need something because I wasn't getting support, he was there to help. And he'll also give me the you know, tea on certain people. It's like, yeah, not them, or okay, they're good. So not being here from the beginning at this firm, all of that is just really important information. So I would say definitely be strategic about it and just take control, because just because you're assigned someone, it doesn't mean it's a match. You can choose. And if there's someone else better, then seek them out. You know, you are the architect of your career, so take control of that. But definitely someone who has that political capital, because sometimes they may have to spend a little bit of it to go to bat for you. And if someone doesn't have any, you know, it's hard for them to spend it to go to bat for you. You know, these are people who may be like on management committees within your firm, or are rainmakers. And so when they speak, people, you know, listen to them. So I would just say, you know, be strategic about it. Make sure you're picking folks who can actually be a sponsor and be in those rooms to speak for you when you can't. And I think you can also earn a sponsor by showcasing your work and talents, because people are watching. And so if you are showcasing those talents and, you know, folks are taking notice, they will, without your knowledge, be a sponsor, and you may never know.
I appreciate
Hey,
that.
can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
Because Juanita, you said this is the first break-in when we. No, but I mean, because Juanita said something really good, and I was taking notes. I mean, you have to drive whatever, except for maybe the allies, right? And even that, you've got to drive this relationship. So I'm on my 17th year of practicing now, and I speak at these panels, or I serve as a mentor for DAP, and I have people call and say, I want you to be my mentor. Well, I don't know what that means. Like, right? It is calling someone and saying, hey, can you mentor me? Imagine how many calls that person may get. What you want to do to drive the relationship is schedule coffee, or schedule a Zoom date or a conference call, and hey, I want to pick your brain about X. So I don't think you have to say, can I be your mentor? Because I think people may hear that and they're like, oh goodness, right now I have 30 people calling me saying, can I be your mentor? But what you want to do is find time and just say, hey, can I pick your brain? I want to get your thoughts on this. I heard you speak, or I saw you here, or I know you do this and I'm interested. And you will have tons of mentors who don't know that they're mentoring you. So you have to actually drive it, and you have to be thoughtful about how you drive it. Same for sponsorship. Nobody's going to sponsor you if they don't know anything about you. So if you call someone and they say, you know, if you need anything, call me, you probably need to have met with them a few times and gotten to know them before you call them to cash in your chips. Because otherwise, if you haven't done anything to foster that relationship, to grow that relationship, to Juanita's point about political capital, and they've only got so much to spend, it's going to be a huge risk to spend it on somebody who hasn't even taken the time to develop and sow fruit, you know, sow into the relationship. So I just want to put a bow on that, Juanita, because I thought that was a really good point.
And let me add one more thing, just one more thing to that, because I think that's a very important subject. Is for any successful attorney, you know, time is going to be a premium. And so what I found effective when I deal with my mentors, you know, I send them an email ahead of time, and the topics or the questions that I may have before, you know, we actually meet. And so that's when, if I can get 15, 30 minutes on their calendar, they've already thought about the questions that I may have for them. And so they can give me some really, you know, thought out and thoughtful answers or responses to those questions. And so, I mean, that does two things. And first of all, it saves time. It lets your mentor know that you value their time. And secondly, you can get a full response, a thought about response or from that mentor. And I said, and third, if I add this on, fostering and watering that relationship, it shows the mentor that you thought things through ahead of time, and you're engaging them with something that's meaningful, that you thought out, and so you are effectively watering that relationship to make it grow.
Thank you for that, Greg. And kind of on that same topic, we're in a new normal, with COVID-19, a lot of things are happening from home. So going to the BELO and kind of running into people who may become these mentors or allies is a little different. In addition to what you've already offered as advice, what other creative ways can law students and young lawyers use in order to build these relationships during this very different time?
That question for myself?
Yeah, for you, Greg, sorry.
Oh, okay. Time, for attorneys, we've had the privilege, for what we do, we can do a lot of from home. So our time commitments to our jobs, it hasn't really changed, with COVID. And so I think, as with all things, you have to be strategic and intentional whenever you engage anyone. So as I mentioned before, emails help a lot. If you know someone that knows someone that you want to engage with, reach out to them and say, hey, give them the rundown, and just simply ask them, would you do a soft introduction to this person, and so you can start forming that relationship. It's so hard these days, with networking events where you have Brady Bunch, time 10 on the Zoom screen to effectively engage and get a meaningful discussion and relationship after the fact. But once you make that contact with a person that could help you with your career, or that you have a similar interest in, or want them to be your mentor, or your sponsor, or your ally, it can't just be one contact. It has to be, the key thing is that the follow-up for every networking event. And whether it may be, and as you learn and understand what that person's all about, follow up and bring something from that past conversation into your new contact, your new interaction with them, to let them know that you were listening and that you want to continue to grow their relationship with that person.
Okay, thank you. So now I just want to we're nearing the end. So I want to go ahead and go to some tangible advice, if there's any more to add, because you all have given so much and we could go on even longer on this topic. But I want to start with Juanita. So for those that are looking to sponsor diverse attorneys, what advice would you give to them?
To the sponsor or to the attorney?
To the sponsor. So if someone's looking to serve as a sponsor, what is your advice to them to ensure that this relationship is effective and meaningful for that diverse attorney?
Well, in the hat of a sponsor, putting the sponsor hat on, I think I would be looking for someone who exhibits those qualities I would want as a future partner in my firm, right? So as an associate, if you're exhibiting qualities that, I see as someone who should be a partner here one day, and I want to help nurture and support you along that path. I don't think that necessarily starts at like first year. I think you probably need to be somewhere more senior before people really start taking notice of that, because I think the attrition rates are so high. You want some return on your investment, right? So you're looking for someone who wants to be around, right? And people are looking for context clues. So if you're constantly talking about going in-house or doing something else, people are listening. So, when you put those out there, it's like, all right, this is probably someone I don't need to spend my time on, because I'm not going to get a return on my investment, from the sense that they're going to become a partner, at the law firm. Now, you may get a return because they go in-house and business, but that's something different. So I think, of course, doing good work and, wanting to learn and being good in your practice area, becoming an expert in your practice area, showing traits of being able to develop business, because as a partner, you need to add to the money pot, right? So you need to be able to develop business, and also to show that you're a team player, that you can mentor and the lower, level attorneys, and that you are committed to the firm. You are a person who advocates for the firm. Perhaps you're in organizations that showcases the firm. You do things that promote the firm or promote the office or promote your practice area. So I think those are some things that probably a sponsor is looking for in an individual if they're going to seek out someone to invest in and, expend their capital.
Okay. And similarly, Tamara, for those looking to serve more in the mentor role, or even if you'd like to add also about advocates, what advice do you give to them? You're on mute for us.
I think first you have to find out what it is your mentee is looking for, right? There's, again, I go back to this, there's no one size fits all approach. And so even for this conference, this program, just to the attendees, you shouldn't leave here and say, Tamara said this, or Juanita or Greg. You have to take what works for you, take this advice, this feedback, and figure out what works for your personal scenario. So I think the first step for a sponsor or a mentee is, what is it that they're looking for, and can you help them, right? Because if I can't help you, we can develop a relationship for sure. I can't help you right now with this thing. So we should continue to work on our relationship, because maybe 2 years from now, I can help you. I can't now, right? This is why you're always pouring into the relationship, not just having a transactional, I need this right now, so I'm going to go to Ashley. Well, no, Ashley can't help me now, but who knows? Well, she'll be in 2 years. So there's still value in developing that allyship is what it would be at that point. But you have to find out what it is they are looking for, and then determine how you can best help them. Because not everybody wants to make partner. And so maybe you don't want a sponsor to help you do that. You want someone to help you determine how to be successful on a non-partnership track and still get good work. Some people want to make partner, but they want to take maternity leave. And so they need to navigate how to do that without getting off track. I mean, there are just so many different scenarios, and we have to, I think, get out of this box of thinking that everybody wants the same thing and needs the same thing. People have different needs, different experiences, different values, different outlooks. And so I would just always start with, as a mentor or as a sponsor, what is it that you need? Maybe what they need is an introduction to someone else who can sponsor them, be a better sponsor to them. So it is really, I know that sounds really maybe not helpful because I'm not giving a specific answer, but I do think that everybody is authentic and unique and has different needs. And so that has to, if you really want to be effective, you have to start with the individual, what they want, and determine whether it's even a good fit. If it is, then you all can develop the relationship in the way that works best, rather than Tamara saying this is what makes a good mentor, because it's going to change depending on the people and the situation. Sorry to kind of kick the can down the road a bit, but it's just a different point of view.
But I think it's a good point of view, because you're right. These relationships are very specific to the individual. So there probably isn't any one piece of advice that can be had. I think that advice in general is figure out what they need is fantastic. So I do want to go to our final wrap-up question, because we have received a couple of questions in the chat, and I believe someone actually wants to ask a question on camera as well. So for our final question today is very broad. What is your hope for the legal profession with respect to diversity? So Juanita, let's start with you.
Oh, that's a big, broad question. Well, I would definitely love to see the numbers go up for women and minorities in management leadership partnership roles in firms, because I think this will definitely help with the attrition. I think recruitment can be hard, but in most cases, recruitment sometimes is easy because everybody wants a job. However, I know that there are piles, right? You get the piles with the certain schools and the certain GPAs, and then the piles not, and only one pile gets looked at, and that eliminates a lot of folks. But people want jobs, so in general, it's easy to recruit. But as you mentioned from the beginning, the retention is really, really difficult, and there's just really no good models of retention, because I think, for one, the model of law firms survival is about attrition. If you have a class of 15 associates, they all cannot ascend to partnership in 8 to 10 years. You need for people to leave, and the funnel is such that, by that time, maybe there are 2 or 3 left, and that's what the partnership can support. That's kind of the most cases. But part of the retention is seeing people that look like you, or if you're having a hard time with sponsors, maybe you have an easier opportunity with someone who looks like you. So we talked about those connections that maybe you can forge because you do have like similarities, and there's an affinity where that relationship can have a foundation and build. And sometimes it's hard to imagine yourself in that position until you see someone. As kids, it's like, oh, I want to be a doctor, but you never see anybody that looks like you. And so perhaps you don't think you can be because you never see someone that looks like you. So I think it's the same with law firms. So I think definitely the numbers need to increase. I think we've kind of had these plateaus and small little, peaks and valleys. But overall, I would just love to see the numbers go up, and we have people that look like us in positions of power at these firms.
Greg, what about you?
Everything that Juanita said. So think about it. Texas, many of us serve Texas in a more expanded market, but Texas is a majority minority state. And so if we're going to serve our community, our profession has to be reflective of that. We have our challenges, with the pool of minority candidates that we have. And what I hope that what we will do is reimagine what this pipeline actually looks like. And I know there's people and organizations who've been really active out there that's expanding this pipeline. Just to kind of give you some of the numbers, 22% of the attorneys in Texas are minority, which isn't reflective of the overall population. And so, so how do we get more people in that pipeline? It can't just be from law school into the law firms, because that's way too short, and we've already lost a group of people. We have to expand that pipeline by extending it out to the high school, undergrad, and that's like many of us. We're second career people who decided to get into law after we began a career. And there's organizations, alumni organizations for young professionals, where people are looking to get into the field of law. And so just expanding that pipeline so that law firms have a bigger population to work with and to get into these key positions. And I would give credit where credit is due. There are law firms who have jumped in both feet, with diversity and inclusion and equity. For example, at my firm, I got an email from the co-president of our firm, who's an African-American male, and someone who manages a 2,200 person law firm, is going down to the lower levels to make sure that their diverse employees feel comfortable. That says a lot, but there has to be across the board to facilitate and foster the progress of diverse candidates and diverse talent at work at these law firms.
And Tamara, final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that they have, that Juanita and Greg have nailed it. So it's not, right, it's not just numbers, like Juanita said, it's also seeing people in leadership. So you're talking GCs, you're talking on boards, you're talking about managing partners, you're talking about judges, and then you're talking about those people sending the elevator back down, and bringing some folks back up with them. And then I think that, you know, Greg was kind of touching on this, as a legal field, particularly a lot of these big firms and companies, we're really elitist. And so we have to open the door to non-traditional paths, non-traditional schools, and just be really a lot more thoughtful about that. I will be glad when that happens. I tell my boss all the time, I have diversity exhaustion. I feel like we've been talking about the same things related to diversity for at least the 17 years I've been practicing, and we're not making the type of progress that we should be making. And so I just hope we, you know, my hope is that we really actually put some teeth behind all this good work that's being done, and really start to move the needle, because there are really talented people out there. And I think the community is going to be better served if we have a more diverse legal profession.
Thank you all for those thoughts. And I knew this panel would share so much wisdom with us today. And I think you have done far more than I could have even expected. And so we are now coming to the close of our program. We're going to open it up for Q&A. If someone is interested in asking a question, please raise your hand and we will be able to bring you on screen to ask whatever question you may have. Before we do that, I did have 2 questions posed in the Q&A box that I want to present to the panel. One is very specific, and so whoever would like to answer, please feel free to jump in. But the question is, are there specific spaces in the workplace where you felt or feel in your careers that white people needed to show up the most for their Black, or more, for their Black and people of color colleagues? Who would like to take that question? No thoughts on that?
Well,
I'm not sure I understand it.
So I think the question comes down to, are there areas in the workplace or just in the field where you feel like white colleagues could do more to show up for their Black colleagues or people of color colleagues? And in what spaces or avenues do you feel like they need to do more?
well, let me just jump in there, because we talked about microaggressions earlier, and you know, it's one thing for a person with a diverse background to stand up, but it speaks volumes when our peers who aren't as part of the culture, stand up and say when something isn't right, and to address it head on. So I think, that's one of the key things, and one of the issues that we have, and as a profession, is, there's not a lot of people who look like us who are at that dinner table, judging us or talking about us and advocating for us. And so, that's a challenge. And once we get there, because everyone on this call, we are a part of the solution. And as Tamara was saying, putting the elevator back down, once we get to that dinner table and be sponsors for others, and to fight, and don't, fall into the construct that there can only be one. There's a big pie out there. There's a big pie out there, and we all have to be a part of the solution and to make our profession better.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry. Anything to add, Tamara or Juanita? No? Okay. And then our final question was this. How should you handle a situation, or what should the next steps be if you've faced some microaggressions from a partner, and then you raise it to your sponsor who just basically tells you to suck it up and deal with it? What do you do next? How do you handle something like that? Who would like to jump in on that one?
I have a short response.
Go ahead.
If that's the case, then that is not a place where you will grow your career. Just to be hands down, completely honest. I know sometimes, money's good, but money isn't everything. If you want to become a professional and be great at your craft, you'll need that support. And it sounds like that's an environment where they don't have any intention on growing your talent. And so my advice would be to look for the greener grass, of course, go somewhere else where they would actually appreciate your talents and help grow your talent.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that I think it depends. So I think again, Tamara speaking, and this is probably true very early in my career, so not just now that I'm 17 years in and have a little bit more, a little bit more political capital of my own, but even early on, if I felt like I experienced a microaggression, if I understand the question, and I went to my sponsor and I said, hey, this is what happened, and they told me to suck it up, I would probably leave, give some thought to it, and not say, this isn't the place for me. I'd probably go back and say, you're supposed to be my sponsor. This is what I experienced, and maybe they don't understand fully. Maybe you need to educate them. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to grow the relationship in a way that also helps them understand what it's like to be in your shoes. And maybe after that, right, maybe you learn that, Juanita said maybe it's not the right person. But I would certainly take a second stab at it. I would try to get this person to understand, because everybody hasn't been a sponsor. Everybody hasn't been educated on what microaggressions are. Everybody doesn't know what it's like to be a Black woman in a majority firm. And so there is an opportunity for you to use this sponsorship tool. It's a two-way street. It's not just what they can do for you, but there is also an opportunity for you to open their eyes in a way that perhaps nobody's ever had that conversation before. If everybody gets a suck it up and leave, right, then the problem's gonna just perpetuate. The circle's just gonna keep churning. So you have to take, I think, some ownership in that and have what I called earlier an uncomfortable conversation. There's a book on having crucial conversations. Maybe that's the better name for it, but maybe there is an opportunity for you there to really help broaden that sponsor or that partner's understanding of what it's like to be in your shoes.
Yeah.
Great advice. Juanita?
Yeah, I agree completely, because I do believe that there's perhaps a gap there, because I think part of the understanding is understanding why that person responded to you that way. If this is someone who perhaps came up through the ranks where that's how they handled the situation, just suck it up. So that's what they're telling you. But again, one size does not fit all, and perhaps they've never had to sponsor a person of color. So that advice in this day and age is not advice that you should just throw out. But I do think, if this relationship is one that you value and you've gotten other stuff, because part of the problem is retention. We kind of have to work through things before just the flight happens. So we got to stay in the fight, and the fight requires conversation and, understanding. So why would you tell me to suck it up? What is it in the situation that I described to you to make you come to that conclusion? And perhaps, I had a situation where I was fighting for some origination credit based on a relationship that I had. And, I had another Black female partner giving me information as an associate that I didn't get, because there's the black box and there's no transparency to some of this stuff. And so I was like, oh, so that's that. Oh, okay. So it's a but for. So but for my relationship, we wouldn't have got this. So that means I should get the credit. Oh, okay. So I went to a white female partner and I said, well, hey, I have this situation. And I got a similar, well, I just share because, we all work together and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, do they share with you on their matters? And it was kind of like, well, No. So, but you have to share as a woman, but as a man, when they bring it in and you're working on their matters, they're not sharing the credit with you. So I listened. Thank you very much. And I did what I thought I needed to do, and that was fight for full credit. Because, although that was her experience and how she got to where she, was in the firm, she was a partner, but she got there by playing nice and giving up a lot because she probably could have got there a lot faster. But at the same token, the male counterparts were not doing the same for her. It was not reciprocity. So I think a lot of times, it's an understanding. And without that understanding, you just kind of maybe not know where people are coming from because they could have really good intentions. And I wouldn't, throw away everything just because maybe you got one piece of advice that didn't necessarily align with what you thought should have been the advice.
Thank you. And I think we have actually one additional question that has come in. And I believe they will be asking in person. So we'll take just a moment to bring them over. I'll take one moment. Okay, while we are waiting to bring over for our last question, I just once again want to thank everyone who participated in today's conversation. And I hope you gained some good nuggets to be able to take back with you and share with your colleagues. We had a comment that said, this is something all young lawyers need to hear, and I cannot agree more. So please, I was taking notes while I was listening. If you took notes, share them with your mentors, your mentees, your sponsors. Oh, and here we go. Judge Moorhead, I hear you have a question.
Yes, I do. I have really enjoyed this. This has been so educational for me. But there seems to be a focus on implicit bias and training throughout the State Bar of Texas and going in directly into law firms. Do you think implicit bias training will be effective? And if whether you do or do not, what do you think should be focused on if they're going to do implicit bias training?
Well, go ahead, Juanita.
Go ahead, Greg.
I think implicit bias training is very important, but I think we have to do a little bit more than that. There's a concept called interrupting bias. And so if you just take one class, it's almost like me taking one class of golf and think I'm going to go out there and shoot a 69 or something like that. It's just not going to happen. There has to be a continuous effort to recognize your own internal bias. And let me tell you about one study that I learned about late last year. There was a study where a group of partners received a memo to evaluate. And the only change they made between memos is the exact same memo across partners, but the names were different. And so one was say it was John Smith, and one was an ethically sounding name. The memo with the ethically sounding name was scrutinized a lot harder and resulted with a lower score. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't matter if the partner was white or brown or black. It's just that part of the internal bias. And so we have to actively interrupt that thought whenever we're evaluating things. And everything we do, whether this could come in, we have to interrupt that and to think, why am I feeling this way? Is there there's something internal to me why I'm evaluating this person different than someone else. So it's just not just the class, but there's supplemental and progressive growth and additional things that we need to do besides just one bias class.
Additional thoughts from Tamara or Juanita?
No, I agree with Greg. It's kind of the minimum, Judge Moorhead. It's kind of the low. And I think, like even with firms, they do the D&I training once a year. And, probably a month later, folks done forgot and acting a fool again. So I think this is something where, it requires more consistency, more training, and perhaps more aggressive training, because people have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And when you're in these situations or these classes, these trainings, and you're uncomfortable because something that has been said hits home, you've got to stay in the fight and, just continue to try to grow and learn. And I think so often, people, they get uncomfortable, they get defensive, and the learning stops, they shut down, and, we don't make progress.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think, it's kind of like what Greg was saying. Implicit bias training raises awareness, but it doesn't change behavior, right? And some folks say it's actually unhelpful because now I know what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and I can just work around it in another way. So if you want more minorities or women, you've got to change your hiring practices. You've got to start having slates of diverse candidates. You've got to go to different schools. You've got to go to HBCU and non-traditional schools. You have to have diverse interviewers. And if all you're doing is implicit bias training, but you're not actually changing people's behaviors at the decision-making point, I don't know how effective. I mean, it'll be effective in raising awareness. I don't know how effective it will be if your overall goal is to increase diversity numbers, women, people of color in the legal profession.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Moorhead, for your question. And I do not see any additional questions. So once again, I'll reiterate my thanks and gratitude to our panel for all of the nuggets of wisdom they have shared. And thank you to each of you who stuck around to the end of the Q&A session as well. So without any further questions, that concludes our program for the day. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.